Welcome to this food forestry workshop. Uh, it's a really meaningful opportunity for me to be here to talk with you guys today and share a little bit about sustainability and social justice, which is the focus of this conference series. Food forestry can be a route to community resilience, freeing ourselves from capitalism and decolonizing our mindsets and communities, as well as many other ways of connecting with the world and creating healthier lifestyles, which are big aspects of why I'm interested in it. With that, I'll start some screen sharing and can dive into my little presentation that I made for you guys. This is a photo from my food forest in Seattle. And yeah, it's been my earliest project of working with the landscape and edible plants. I'll give a little background about myself first. Yeah, like I mentioned, I study at Evergreen State College in sustainable land management, some entrepreneurship, ecology, and some artistry. And I've been focused on learning about sustainable food forestry and community gardening for years since high school, when I really started coming to terms with the state of the world that we're in and feeling empowered to create some change and start creating the world that we want to see. So I really saw community engagement through food forestry as the biggest way that I could influence the world to be the way that I want it to be, which is full of abundance and healthy food and communities who love and support each other, intertwining not just with human communities, but with plant communities as well. Yeah, somebody says that they love the boot. This is a day that I went out to harvest some willow cuttings, which were for a slope restoration project. I have all sorts of different landscaping projects happening all over Pacific Northwest, and some of them pertain to food and some of them pertain more to habitat. And that one in particular was to restore a slope side to a native habitat. The photo of me on the roof over my garden in Seattle, and photo of me collecting cherries in Olympia, Washington, as well as cuttings from a mulberry tree. So a big part of the way to start engaging with food forestry is to engage with ourselves. And the more we can connect with ourselves and connect with who we are and where we come from, the more we can connect with what's around us. So these are some basic questions that I like to ask myself and other people. And people feel like sharing for 20 or 30 seconds about any of these. Feel free to unmute yourselves and join in. I'll just share a couple maybe. I last got dirt under my fingernails last week. It's actually been longer than I usually go because I'm visiting Austin and not gardening here. But otherwise, it's pretty much every day. I'm connected to my Jewish heritage and have, learned some aspects of land care and community care through that religious connection. Specifically, my bar mitzvah Torah portion was on how you should leave the corners of your field unreaped for the passerby and wildlife and those less fortunate than us. And I've shared enough about myself at this point. So if anybody wants to share a little bit, I would love if we could get some participation. And again, I totally support you if you just want to be shy.
I guess I could talk about my relationship with gardening itself. I've always been fascinated with gardening and things like that, just plant life in general. And where I live right now, I'm still living with my parents, but we have like a few garden boxes and we grow like tomatoes is something we've grown ever since I was little. And so we grow tomatoes, but I mean, even now we're trying out squash this year and corn. Carrots is another thing we're growing, but I would definitely like to have land in the future where I could have kind of my own like garden, and not really just garden boxes, but like
Mhm.
natural earth dirt, I guess.
There you
And
go.
it, but
Thanks for sharing, Gabriel. I guess that's why you're here. Yeah, that dream really resonates with me, and it can happen. There is an abundance of land that needs loving and care and stewardship, and there's a lot out there that we already have access to, as I'm going to share with you in this presentation. Thank you for sharing, Gabriel. It means a lot to me. If anybody else wants to pop in for just a few seconds, now is your opportunity. Otherwise, I'm going to move along.
Hello, everyone. I'm Mel. I'm fully listening to everything. I apologize for the camera turned off, but I'm located in Lakewood. I moved from Georgia, and in Georgia, my family had a lot of garden boxes as well. But since we moved, it's I'm not familiar with the things that you can grow up here. Like the climate's of course very different. So yeah, still trying to figure that out. I just started some beans in my window, so that's kind of cool. Otherwise, like I'd really like to get started in planting more and being more educated on that. So hopefully I can learn some more in this presentation I'm really excited for.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing, Mel. Thank you for being here. Godspeed to your beans, and yeah, you're on the right track. So yeah, just to start off with defining what food forestry is, here's a little graphic of the 7 layers of a forest garden. Biggest aspect of food forestry is that it's not just a few crops or a few plants that you have to tend to all the time. It's an intermingling community of plants that support each other, support the steward of the land, and exist in a reciprocal relationship and a cyclical nature, just like the native forest does, in a way where it perpetuates itself. Each plant supports another through either putting nitrogen into the ground, which specific plants like the pea family, your beans, Mel, will be putting nitrogen into the soil as they grow. And yeah, many flowers like lupin fertilize the soil, where, and as you can see in this graphic, the trees offer support for vining plants as well as shade for plants that require more shade. And we can really start thinking about forest gardens in this way of each plant offers something to its neighbor, just like how we can think about in a healthy community and a fun neighborhood to live in. Each neighbor knows each other and offers something to one another, even if it's just presence and a shoulder to lean on. Some examples of the food forest revolution, which is currently underway. We're experiencing a major shift in thinking around land management and transition to the recognition of the abundance that's around us, and the ways that humans can interact with the landscape in a way that gives back as well as supports one another, instead of just being an exploitative force, as colonizing and capitalist cultures have exhibited over the last few centuries. So just here's some examples of places that you could go visit if you're interested in seeing what a forest garden looks like. The Beacon Hill Food Forest in Seattle, Washington is one of my favorite sites. I've been visiting there over the last few years, and it's really starting to mature. I think it's in its 8th or 9th season. So yeah, it takes a little while for a forest garden to establish, but this one is a pretty good example of them starting to reach a mature age. It's free to access. All of the food growing there is free. I go there to collect cuttings and plants and root divisions and seeds to stock my other gardens. And yeah, there really are community gardens all over many cities, both in this country and globally. The Seattle Pea Patch program is a great way to participate in community gardening and start to learn. I have not visited most of these other sites. I really want to go to the Miami Fruit and Spice Park. I'm hoping to visit the North Lamar Food Forest in Austin, maybe this week, maybe next time I'm here. I think that's a younger one. Grown in Haiti is a organization that I've worked with in Haiti, and they advocate for sustainable food forestry and grow out hundreds of fruit trees to share with the community. That's not an urban site, it's quite rural, but I thought I'd mention it. You can follow them on Instagram if you'd like, as well as last time I was there, I made chocolate by hand and I'm selling it to support their community center project, which will offer learning opportunities to the community. So if anybody wants handmade chocolate and to support a good cause, feel free to reach out to me after this workshop. And the last site on here is probably the youngest food forest on the list, which is one that I've started in Olympia, Washington, at the request of some members of our houseless community who wanted gardens. And so far we have something like 42 trees in the ground, fruit trees and chestnuts, many flowering plants, strawberries, blueberries, raspberries, and it's a way for our community to start coming together and stewarding a part of the landscape that really could use some love and care. So if you'd like to come visit that at some point, feel free to reach out to me. I'll have my contact info at the end of this workshop, and I'd love to get you plugged in. So in this section, I'd like to really just take a moment to recognize the abundance that's around us. Once you start living with an abundance mindset and looking for how much nourishing food there is, even just growing around the city, you will be surprised at how often you find something to snack on while walking around your town or your city, especially in the spring or summer in this climate, but year round if you know what you're looking for. So here's some examples of blueberries and edible nasturtiums and flowers outside of a cafe in Olympia, Washington. Some cherries. I don't remember where this tree was, but I already have, and you will start to have a mental map of fruit trees all over your neighborhood when you start to go for walks, looking specifically for things to eat. And this is a mulberry tree on the right, one of my favorite fruits. It's a really special tree to me, and you can climb way up in it and eat way more berries than you probably really should. As well as I think people have put out tarps or sheets underneath this tree because the berries will just drop all day, and you come back in the evening and scoop them up and put them in a bucket, lay your tarp back out for the next day. These berries are great fresh on salads and desserts and smoothies, or you can dehydrate them and save them for eating in the wintertime. There's truly a lot of food growing around us, and a lot of food that doesn't get appreciated. You can find a lot of trees that are both in need of love in the way of pruning and fertilizing, and also that will love you right back with how much fruit they produce. If you know where to look for them and know what time of year to go visit them. Here's some photos of me just being excited about the abundance of Oregon grapes at a local park in Seattle, Rogers Park. This is a native plant, Pacific Northwest native. You can find it growing in forests, and there's also cultivated landscape varieties, which this one is that goes under the name Charity, which I think is fitting for how much fruit it produces. This bag was, maybe a 12th of the fruit that was available on those bushes that day. And here's a whole bunch of jam that I made with it. So again, preserving through canning or drying are ways to really make your food last through the winter. I see in the chat, Mel asks, how long ago is this? Both of these let's see, the last one, growing curbside, this was last season, spring and summer 2020. And I think this Oregon grape photo was 2018. So yeah, I'm a little younger there. But the bushes are still there. They're even bigger now. They produce even more fruit. And it's all that abundance is coming back year after year. So moving on to how you can engage with the landscape and how you can help spread the forest. There are so many different plants that all it takes is clipping off a little piece of the plant or digging up a little piece of the root and putting it in the soil. Somebody's in the waiting room. Let me check that out. Thank you for letting me know. Yeah. Okay. Welcome, Kundi. Sorry I left you in the waiting room for a bit. I'll keep that page open. And hopefully everybody else has been present. So yeah, thank you for joining, Kundi. We're just getting to how you can participate in your urban forest to help spread and propagate plants to create more of them. There's different ways to propagate plants. You can dig roots, you can take cuttings, this is that boot full of willow that I showed in the start, or you can plant seeds. This is a seed head from an old artichoke flower that grew in my garden, and without any effort of my own, the seeds inside started sprouting by themselves. And all it took was burying that seed head to get new plants. On the left, those are sword ferns. Again, part of a native restoration project, but a similar concept for many other plants. You just dig up a piece of the root, or even sometimes rooted parts of the plant will exist above ground, and you can cut them off. Fig trees, you can do this with, many different types of ferns, bulbous plants like daylilies or daisies, or not daisies, tulips or daffodils. All it takes is digging up a little clump and replanting it. So those can be really quick ways to start planting a new forest and get the initial planting in that will offer support to plants that will come later in the process. Here's just a little information and visual on how to make a new garden bed or propagation plot. Yeah, I've got a question from Andrew here. Is there any kind of focus on native species in the food forests? And it depends on the forest, depends on who's creating it. I think there should absolutely be a focus on native species in all food forests, because those are the plants that are best adapted to the local site and will know how to grow there without much or any assistance from gardeners. So if you're going from a bare lawn or a piece of degraded land, starting with native species can help you start approaching what will have a forest type of climate that will support other plants by building up soil, by offering shade, by fixing nitrogen, by attracting pollinators, as well as making it a lush and green site that people and animals will be attracted to. So yeah, a lot of the time in my food forests, I'll include native species that grow food, as well as ones that just produce habitat. Because habitat and wildlife are a critical part of making a food forest that is fully connected to the local ecosystem. This here is just a small garden bed. And this is when I started last spring. This is the school bus I've been living in for the last year and a half. And as you can see, I just dug up some of the sod and moved it off to the side. I added some compost and started putting plants in the ground. This was my vegetable garden for the season, as well as where I put those mulberry cuttings, as well as I put some daylilies that I dug up and propagated in there. And I've used it throughout the last year to store other plants that I wasn't ready to plant out elsewhere, like a dozen chestnuts that went in at the Deschutes Food Forest. And yeah, any other cutting or propagate or seedling that I needed to put in the ground. This is kind of a in-between spot, as well as growing my vegetables. Let's see, I think I have a photo of later on. Yeah, here, so it's partway into the season with daylilies, and there's some mulberry cuttings in there. Those daylilies I've since dug up and spread out elsewhere. And yeah, so they grew for a full season and multiplied, and I was able to spread the forest into other areas. And then this is at the end of the season. You can see the tomato vines and beans and cucumbers really kind of exploded. And I made a lot of tomato sauce out of that garden. I ate a lot of meals out of that garden. And at the same time, all my cuttings underneath there were growing slowly and getting ready to spread the forest elsewhere. So that's an example of stacking functions, which is one asset of permaculture thinking. Some of you might be familiar with that. If not, that's a buzzword that you can look up. There's a lot of recent Western experimentation going into sustainable land management under the name of permaculture, the concept of creating a permanent culture, which is really just an example of re-indigenizing and living with within the landscape in a settled way. Thank you, Mel. I think the bus is cool too. It's been a nice place to live for the last year and a half. Yeah, so here's an example of what you can do with some of this information once you get used to propagating your plants and once you start getting to know what grows in your area, mostly by looking around at what's already growing. This is the area, this is my parents' side yard in Seattle, in the Queen Anne neighborhood. If anybody wants to visit, you can get my contact info at the end of the workshop and get in touch with me. This was just all lawn plus one large holly tree, which is a pretty vigorous invasive in our forest here. So I felt a little guilty about cutting that down. You know, it was habitat for birds and also was spreading invasive seeds all over, as well as creating a lot of shade. And we repurposed the wood for these garden beds. So I tried to recycle it back into the landscape instead of treating it as waste. You know, which is a big way of sinking into the landscape and not living exploitatively, looking at all creatures as a cycle, part of the cycle instead of waste or trash. So some of the wood went to these garden beds you can see, and the rest of the wood went into this mound on the left, just covered in wildflowers in the second photo. And that is called a hugelkultur. I wish I had that word in there because it's a funny one. It's basically German for hill culture. I think Sepp Holzer is credited with the modern engineering of it, but I'm sure it's an age-old practice. Basically just burying wood underneath soil to decompose, help offer food to the fungal community, and build up organic matter over time. And in soil, organic matter is what holds moisture and what holds nutrients. So if you can increase the levels of organic matter, you start building a healthier soil community. Yeah, if you look at the soil in native Pacific Northwest forests, if you dig down deep enough, it's actually quite poor sandy soil a lot of the time. But the top foot or so is rich, dark, loamy, filled with organic matter soil. And that's what holds so much moisture and what supports the whole web of life in the forest. So yeah, you can see just some of the growth of fruit trees. You can see them starting to flower on the rightmost photo. The right is the most recent. We pull raspberries out of here. We get apples, we get some pears. All of the trees are still just kind of coming into maturity now at about 5 years of age. The flowers in the garden bed on the right is kale, which instead of pulling it out when it starts to flower or when it seems done with its life cycle, I just let it flower and attract pollinators and then make seed. And that seed falls naturally as well as feeds the birds. And that seed goes on to produce new plants. So I think there's 2 or 3 generations of kale plants in this garden bed at this point. And I haven't planted kale in at least 3 years, but we eat kale all the time from the garden. So that's a way of recognizing how by letting plants participate in their natural cycle, the natural lifespan, we can actually give ourselves less work as gardeners and be better collaborators in the garden. There's one more photo on the left of that garden and a photo on the right of the Deschutes food forest, which we're starting. This is what a baby food forest looks like. Not that much, but there's actually a lot of different species going on in there. You can see down the center line, there's actually a swale that we've dug, a small ditch on the slope to help catch rainwater and help moisturize the soil. Or hydrate the soil. Moisturize is kind of a funny word for that. But yeah, we have a lot of fruit trees. And then yeah, looking down further beyond this main cleared patch, we have different fruit trees planted along the roadside strip. And behind me, we have about 24 chestnut trees planted along the strip. So we'll be working to keep these watered through the summer and prepare for more planting in the fall. It's been a really special way to connect different parts of the community. We have people across a wide range of demographics coming to volunteer, and it's a great way for the housed community to get to know some of our houseless neighbors and a way for the houseless to engage with gardening and help beautify the space they're living in, as well as feel empowered to take control of their surroundings. Yeah, so this would qualify as like a guerrilla garden, is one term for that, because nobody asked for permission to do this. The land on this strip is disputed between 3 different entities: the railroad, the state, and the city. 4 entities actually, also whoever is in charge of managing Capitol Lake on the right. And it's just weeds, invasive plants, and rat nests, basically. So I feel really good about just stepping in and starting to try to integrate some better stewardship without needing to feel like we need to be given rights or be given access by anybody. I feel that the access and the right to access is something that's earned through appropriate stewardship. It's also to recognize, this is still on unceded territory of Squaxin Islander tribes. So I think the most ethical thing would be to find a way to invite those communities into stewarding the land or helping guide the process. And to be honest, that's not something that I've approached yet. And it feels like an important thing to go and just recognize that's something that I feel like should happen that I haven't been doing yet. And I would like to make that happen before too long. Some beauty shots from the garden at my folks' place. There's an example of the pollinators, this crazy shiny green bee on blackberry flowers, and a small apple tree on the left that started from a seed. I've seen more insects than I knew existed into this garden, come into this garden since I started planting it. So yeah, it just really shows if you start caring for the land, other things will appreciate it as well. We're starting to run low on time, so I'll just kind of jump through this, and I don't think we're going to get a lot of interaction with folks, but you can just ponder this by yourself. I'll give you a few seconds to think about it. But here's a little interactive game portion on considering whether or not you should propagate a plant. This is thimbleberry here in the background, a native raspberry type of plant. It's growing on the roadside right by this telephone pole. I wanted to spread this to an area that had been cleared and was in need of some new vegetation. And so I was wondering if this was a good place to dig up some root cuttings of this plant so that I could spread it somewhere else. So here we're just kind of thinking about the ethics and the needs for the plant and whether or not it makes sense to propagate from this setting. And whenever I go to do this, I take some time sitting with the plant. It does not need to be a rushed decision, and you should be asking both all the parts of yourself as well as the plant and the soil around it if it makes sense to propagate. In this setting, I thought it did make sense to propagate because roadsides and utility areas get cleared, and there was so much of this plant growing in that patch. It wasn't going to miss a couple cuttings that were probably going to get cut away anyways and not used. So I dug them up and spread them. This little cane has come back this season and is starting to spread on its own. And this cleared area, which is for a septic area that my landlord put in, I was able to start vegetating that. Here's some daylilies growing in a similar area. It's a non-native ornamental and flowers edible and delicious. And this one, again, you propagate by digging up a clump of the root and spreading it. And the setting where I maybe wouldn't dig this up is if it was in somebody's garden that was perfectly manicured and clearly somebody was really putting a lot of time and attention into. In this situation, it was just living on the roadside. So I left some behind for who would come next, and so I could keep growing, but I was able to take a few shoots and spread them into my garden. This is a young edible variety of elderberry that's planted actually in a landscaping project that I worked on. You can take cuttings from these in the late fall or early spring, preferably right before it loses its leaves, right before it grows its leaves. And this is a plant I'm always looking for to take cuttings from. And in this situation, I was really tempted, but I decided not to take cuttings from it because it's so small. I don't want to set it back by cutting off important pieces of its growth. But within a few years, it'll grow quite large, and that'll be a good time for me to start propagating from it. Here's a native ground cover called oxalis or wood sorrel, great in salads, great in soups. This is somebody's front yard in Seattle. And I was really tempted to dig up some of this for my garden. And here, when it's growing in somebody's yard, it's a great opportunity to get to know a neighbor and discuss food forestry. This is an easy to propagate plant by digging up a root clump and planting it somewhere else that will stay moist and shaded. And I would say the best opportunity in this situation is to knock on the door and see if anybody's home and talk to them about your interests and your desire for the plant, and yeah, communicate that you know how to dig it up safely and without ruining their garden. And if you're kind, chances are they'll be kind too. And in this case, I walked away with a nice clump of oxalis to plant in my garden. Yeah, here's some good action steps for what you can start doing tomorrow. I'd love for everybody to look at these, maybe take a screenshot or jot something down to remind you. But if you're really serious about starting on this food forest journey, this is how you can do that. I love to go on walks around my neighborhood to get to know people and the plants and the forest around me, as well as explore public gardens. And yeah, if you choose just one of these to do each week, you will really start to get to know the plants around you, know the people around you, and you can begin your own propagation plot, start collecting plants of your own, start growing out a nursery to share with others, and really just start getting to know what's around you so you can feel more integrated and more connected to the landscape, as well as start participating in the abundance of wild food that there is all around us. Andrew mentioned, remember to sanitize your pruning clippers. That is a really good point. Plants have diseases just like people do. And just like how today's day and age, you maybe want to wash your hands after shaking hands with someone. You would do well to either carry a wet wipe or an alcohol spritz to sanitize your pruning clippers between cutting plants so you don't accidentally spread a fungus or a virus or a bacteria from one plant to another. Fruit trees, especially in more cultivated varieties, have issues with diseases. And yeah, you can absolutely spread something like peach leaf curl fungus to another peach or nectarine tree. If you use your clippers on an infected tree and don't sanitize them before clipping an uninfected tree. Yeah. And as far as researching plants that you don't recognize, I'll share some resources for being able to do that later on. I know this slide is one that I want to work on. And again, it's maybe something that you could take a photo of and take a longer look at a little bit later, since just kind of having to move through, since I think we're running a little bit late, which I think is okay since we started a little late. But a big part of the social justice aspect of food forestry is shifting away from a colonizer mindset that focuses on exploitation of land and separation from our ecological communities. Being 10 minutes longer than planned. Great, so it's 5:30. Thank you, Gabriel. So like I mentioned before, how I believe one's right to land comes from being a good steward. That is kind of in direct contradiction to the belief that land is something that can be purchased and owned and traded as a private entity, as well as considering about how we use waste on this third from the bottom. Like I mentioned with reusing the holly tree that I took down in the garden that I worked on, recognizing that we can't just throw things away at this point, especially with recognizing the world as a global and interconnected entity. There's no way. So this is why we start being more responsible about what kind of single-use plastic we use. And yeah, just really understanding that all of our interactions affect somebody else and affect something else. Yeah, if people have questions about these, maybe hold on for just a moment or put it in the chat and try and wrap up here so we can use the last few minutes for questions. Here's some related readings. I recommend reading all of these if you're really interested in this topic. Eating the Landscape and Braiding Sweetgrass are really valuable lenses into an Indigenous perspective on ecology and plant relationships. The Hidden Half of Nature and One Straw Revolution can teach you a lot about how soil works and how to build it, how to grow it. Pacific Northwest Foraging and Plants of the Pacific Northwest Coast are great ways to start learning about the native ecology and how to utilize as well as propagate and care for native plants. And the Community Food Forest Handbook is a valuable resource if you're looking at starting your own food forest. Stick here for another moment if anyone wants a screenshot or take a photo. And we can always come back to these for in question time. Some suggested tools and resources, a couple apps here. First three are apps, pretty valuable resources for getting to know plants and getting to know different areas. And then, yeah, like somebody mentioned, there's a forest right by where they live. Sorry, that's my timer. And anywhere where there are plants growing can be a resource, as well as a place to connect. And please keep in touch if you like this talk, if you'd like to connect more or talk about this more. I'm entirely open for that. I'd love to, this is my passion, this is my life. And I'd love to meet passionate people and interested people and connect about all sorts of topics related to this and beyond this as well. So you can follow me on Instagram if you want to kind of loosely keep touch, and feel free to shoot me an email or text me as well. Pretty casual and informal here. So just let me know what you're interested in. I'm available for garden consultations, in person or remote. I love to help people figure out how to take care of their garden. Yeah, I'm interested, love to help people just as a friend, and also can offer hourly or sliding scale prices for in-person consultations. And if there's any public or private speaking events that you're interested in having me share at, I'm looking for more opportunities to share about this topic. And that's all that I have for you. So thank you everybody for being here and participating and listening. And yeah, if anybody has questions, we have just a couple more minutes, and I don't know if it's going to end right at 5:30, but we can probably push a little bit longer if people have questions. So please, yeah, chime in and let me know what you're thinking. Comments or questions or concerns, or reflections, or whatever. Tell me how your day's going. You can also put them in the chat if you don't want your voice recorded or in the presentation. Sweet. I'll put up this list of readings one more time. If nobody has any other things to share or ask. And yeah, once you get going on this topic, I don't think you want to stop. I really advocate for it not just being a focus or a hobby, but as a lifestyle, as a way to integrate into the land around us and really shift our way of looking at the world. I think a lot of the change that we need to see, that we want to see to create a more just, a healthier, and more loving world is not change that's going to happen through institutions or organizations. It's going to happen when we each individually decide to live with care, anticipate abundance, and help spread natural wealth through caring for the landscape and caring for one another. So I hope I've convinced you that food forestry is unapproachable and appropriate avenue for this, and each and every one of you has the power to plant the future and change the world for the better. So with that, I think we'll call it a day, unless anybody else has anything else to say or chime in with. Cool. Thank you for being here, guys. I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. And yeah, I hope at least one of you will reach out. I love making new friends. So, oh, there was one question in here. Somebody asked if you can get a tour of the bus if you visit. Unfortunately not. I'm moving out at the end of this month. And yeah, it's on somebody else's property. I'll probably stay in touch with them, but not really yeah, not something I'm gonna invite people to take a tour of. But if you want to stop through Seattle and see the garden there, and even propagate some plants from it, or take a walk at the Beacon Hill Food Forest with me, I'm 100% open to that. Yeah, so I think I'll end the meeting unless anybody else wants to chime in. Yeah, thank you, Andrew. You're welcome. It's really been a pleasure. All right, enjoy the rest of your conference. Have a nice day.